Hello there. Today I'm going to be doing the philosophy of reading tag, which is a really good tag. It's made by Brandon over at Brandon's Bookshelf, and he doesn't really need an introduction. But yeah, thank you, Brandon, for creating this. It's really good. And thanks also to Mark from Booktime with Elvis for tagging me. Yeah, I'm going to go straight into it, hopefully. And it's quite long, so I'm hoping not to go too off topic. But let's get right into it. So the first prompt is, what's most important? A good character, plot, or message? And for me, my initial reaction to this question is none of the above. I don't really think any of these are integral to a good book, to good writing. But if I had to choose maybe plot, I think that's, if I'm reading a novel, that's what's nagging in the back of my head. That's the thing I want to find out. But sometimes that's a hindrance. But I'd still, go with plot. So, yeah. Okay, and then second is, should one read books about ideas or opinions that they disagree with? And again, I'd say yes to this one. At least with me and my reading, I come on it with a sort of direction that when I'm reading, I'm not expecting to agree with what the writer's saying. I'm really reading to challenge my own perception, my own sort of worldview, the way I see things, my own opinions, and then I can see the world maybe in a bit more detail, with a bit more nuance. So that's what I kind of go for. And I think, it's then even more so if you were to go and read something from a writer who's like just on the total opposite camp to you. I think I'd say if you're trying to do that, maybe do it with a certain amount of discretion. It might increase empathy with people you disagree with, which is always a good thing. But also, it can, if you get up on the wrong end of the bed, maybe you'll just get angry. So a bit of discretion is always good. So number 3, as tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? And this goes in a few different directions. This is one of the good prompts. The initial thing that I think you tend to think of with this is the relationship between physical books and ebooks. And I think if you look at the last few years, ebooks haven't really done that much to make us feel that scared that physical books are going anywhere anytime soon. But where it maybe gets a bit more interesting would be looking at different media. So as technology develops, as the way we seek and consume entertainment changes, what role would reading have? And I think that's where it's different. And even not just entertainment, but also maybe information and learning and things like that. I mean, maybe it's more dramatic with learning. Maybe less people are going to books to find stuff out now, and it's more YouTube, Google, a more audiovisual way of learning rather than the kind of traditional way. And so I think, books might get a little bit outdated maybe in time when it comes to that kind of thing, but I think there will still be a place for them. So number 4, how important are summaries, reviews, and art in your book choosing? None of these are really that important to me. They can kind of swing me either way, but I don't rely on them. Maybe the more obvious of the 3 would be the artwork on a book. Obviously, sometimes the artwork on a book can really pull you in. I'm looking at a Sherlock Holmes book right there, and that's why I bought it. It's really cool. I don't have hands. There we go. Yeah. So, I bought it mainly for the cover. But there are some, there's some book covers that I tend to double bluff with them, or think they're trying to double bluff me, where the cover's so good that maybe it's kind of overcompensating for the book a little bit. It's just trying to make me want to buy it. And so in that case, I then don't want to read the book because of the artwork. So they're not super important really, because they can push me either way, so I just don't pay much attention to them. Then number 5 is, should one ever skim or scan a book? I think that totally depends on the book. I wouldn't really do it with a novel or something like that. I wouldn't be able to really comprehend what's going on if I was just skimming through it. But say if I was reading a commentary alongside a book, I don't really do that, but if I was, that would be an instance where I would sort of skim and scan my way through to the relevant information. The same if I'm looking for a certain sort of reference to cite in an essay or something, I'd do that. But for sort of general reading for enjoyment's sake, for me it actually takes a bit of the enjoyment out of it. And then next up is number 6, should reading always be enjoyable? When I hear this, it kind of sounds like there being like an adult towering on top of you, being like, you will enjoy this, and that's like the one thing you don't want to hear, and you're not going to enjoy it. But I think reading can always be enjoyable, and it's really up to the reader then to see what it is in reading that they enjoy, if that makes any sense at all. So there are obviously all kinds of different books that you can read. Some people will prefer other books to others, and so when you find out what's your jam, then I mean, reading can be enjoyable, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that it should always be enjoyable. Number 7, is it important to be well read? And in the grand scheme of things, I don't really think it is. There are probably bigger problems in the world than whether people are well read or not. Maybe reading isn't always the solution to our biggest problems. But that being said, I think, if more people were reading, then I think the world will be a slightly better place at least. So it would be better if more people did read, but is it important to be well read? Maybe not totally important, no. So then number 8, what is your book buying process? I wasn't massively aware that I have a process. I mean, I buy books in all kinds of different ways. I buy books online, I buy them in person. I suppose a big part of my book buying process, particularly when in person, is just browsing. And I enjoy browsing bookshops. It's my favourite thing about them, really. I think I probably tend to shoot straight to the poetry section, but if I'm in a bookshop and I know I've got the time, I'll probably make my way through, if not all of it, then most of it. It's just picking up whatever I feel in the mood for picking up, really. It's just intuitive like that. And then if it's a bit more intentional, if there are certain books that have been on my mind for a while and I can't find them when I'm browsing in a bookshop, that tends to be where the online thing goes on. I like using World of Books and Abe Books sometimes, and occasionally I use bookshop.org and Amazon, but World of Books is my sort of favourite place for online secondhand books. And then number 9, what is your reading process? And a reading process, it sounds quite a funny way of putting it, but I tend to try and read at least a little bit every day. I try to be quite disciplined in that way. I don't always read every day, and I don't beat myself up if I haven't read anything that day, but most days I read. I tend to take at least one book, normally multiple books with me wherever I go. So if I can snatch a few minutes of reading in during the day, then that's something. And I've managed to get through quite a lot doing things that way. So now most of my reading, at least half of my reading, tends to take place on the train. I can get maybe 5 or 10 minutes in. Some days during my lunch break at work and stuff like that. And so really it's just taking the book with me when I'm going out and just being intentional, and trying to read every day. The other sort of part of my book reading process is that I tend to read multiple books at once, which initially I thought would maybe confuse me or slow me down, but I've actually found it to be an advantage, because quite often and I put a book down because I'm bored, I'm not bored of reading, I'm just bored of that particular book at that time. And so then having a couple of other choices of things to arouse my interest at that point in time keeps me reading. And then that's more books read eventually. So that's my reading process. So number 10 is, how do you use what you read? Which is a really interesting question, and I wish I could probe a bit more into it, maybe ask some questions about this question, because it kind of implies all reading has a kind of function, which I don't really think it always has to. So really I just read to enjoy myself, because it's fun. But I suppose I have a booktube channel, so that's one way I use what I read. And really, I just read to mull over, to consider things, really. So that's not necessarily using it, but that's a reason why I would read. Okie dokie. And then number 11 is, if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? Short answer is yes, I would still read, because it's a totally different thing. Just like many people still read when they listen to audiobooks, and yet they still read. They watch the film adaptation and still read the book. Having just the information straight into your brain will be a totally different experience to reading the book. I think such a big part of reading a book is the gradual layering of things and the gradual building of emotions or of information, and of your reaction as well. Your reaction kind of changes as you go through it. And then having all the information at once, then how would that work? How would you respond to it? And so obviously I don't know, because I've never had a book downloaded into my brain, but I suspect I'd still want to have that experience, so I'd still read. So number 12, what are your views on rereading a book? I think rereading is great. I've just reread 2 books I really love. I just read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Hobbit, and just loved the experience of revisiting them. Because as I was kind of saying in the last prompt, reading a book isn't just the garnering of information, but it's an experience. And revisiting that experience, it can be a really, really good thing, a really cozy, welcoming thing. The flip side to that is sometimes, with some books, they're good for you at certain points in your life, and they're not so good for you at other points in your life. And I think it's totally cool to recognise that. So if you read a book and then 10 years later you read it and you're not enjoying it as much, I don't think there's a problem with that. But it's good that you've had a go at rereading it, I guess, and have sought to have that experience again, even if you didn't have it again. Cool. And then number 13 is, what makes a good book? And then the next one, number 14, is what makes a bad book. So I'm kind of answering both questions at once. And to do this, I kind of had to think of two books. One book I really, really liked, a book I thought was really good, and then another book that I didn't enjoy as much and I thought was bad. And so I was trying to probe into why I thought one was good and one was bad. And really, with the good book, what I really felt with it was a kind of a consistency in its tone, an intentionality to the book, a clear and steady, consistent voice all the way through that kind of carries the reader. And I think that's true for poetry, for fiction, for non-fiction. If you have that, then that is what makes a book good. And then for what makes a book bad, it's kind of the opposite of that. So with the book I was thinking of, there wasn't really any clear, consistent voice that felt real and authentic as I was reading it. It didn't feel intentional either. Everything seemed incidental and just off the cuff. And so, at least for me, that's what makes a book good or bad, is this, whether or not it's kind of intentional, whether it's authentic, and whether or not it's consistent in what it's trying to do. And then number 15 is, how do you feel about not finishing a book? I never feel too bad about finishing a book, as in I don't have any guilt about not finishing it. It's not something I do very often. I do always feel a bit sad about not finishing a book, only because the book wasn't doing what I was expecting to do. So it is always sad when I have to put a book down and I decide not to read it. But that doesn't happen very often, and most of the time when I put down a book, it's not me thinking I'm not going to finish it. It's I'm going to be revisiting it eventually. Just now is not the right time. So it's only very rarely that I intentionally don't finish a book. Then number 16 is, should the author's personal life matter at all? And I feel myself straying more towards saying no in this question. I normally don't really want to probe too much into the author's personal life because really I'm reading the book for the book. So where it really boils down to it really is whether the author's personal life comes into what I'm reading, whether it kind of strays in somehow into the writing. And I suppose that example I can think of to maybe illustrate this a bit better would be Ted Hughes, who's one of my favourite poets, and lots of people in the past and probably still today won't read Ted Hughes because he was married to Sylvia Plath, and Sylvia Plath killed herself following the sort of breakdown of their marriage, and for some people it's probably quite rightly so that they wouldn't want to read Ted Hughes. But for me, sort of, someone who grew up after Ted Hughes had died, and have actually read a fair bit of his stuff, and when I read it, I don't see sort of any views that I would see as overly misogynistic or violent towards women or anything like that. And whenever his personal life really is really part of his poetry, it's actually quite delicate, quite beautiful, quite confessional, particularly later on in his career. And so for me, even though his relationship with Sylvia Plath and everything that happened, it definitely complicates my view of Ted Hughes, and it's certainly a sort of conflict there with my relationship with Ted Hughes as a writer and with his work. But it's not necessarily enough to stop me from reading his stuff. And other people won't want to read his stuff, and that's totally fine and quite valid, probably. So that's where I kind of stand on there. It depends on how much it filters into the writing, and whether that writing is then kind of giving me that author's views and stuff. So then number 17 is, if you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? It's a really hard one. I probably wouldn't really go for poetry, even though I love poetry, mainly because I don't really think of poetry as a genre, really. It's a form, whereas prose breaks down into fiction, non-fiction, and fantasy and all that stuff. So we're putting poetry to one side, and really on the BBC radio show Desert Island Discs, one of the last questions is, you're already given 2 books, and then what would your third book be? And the 2 books they give you is the Bible and the Complete Shakespeare. And to be honest, I'd be quite happy if I just had to read the Bible and the Complete Shakespeare for the rest of my life. That's enough to keep me busy, enough to reread and to think about and to explore. So I'd probably just leave it there with the Bible and Shakespeare. Then number 18 is, do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? I think in this day and age, it's quite hard to read a book without knowing anything about it. Even if I haven't really seen videos or read reviews or seen some kind of publicity or marketing for the book on social media, if I'm in the bookshop, I'm probably going to read the synopsis of the book, which is something about it. It'll probably have blurbs from critics in there. That's probably going to sway my opinion and get me thinking about whether or not I want to read it. So at least for me, it's quite hard to read a book without knowing anything about it. I tend to go off an author's reputation, what people on booktube or elsewhere, people I know have said about certain authors and certain books, And so that tends to be what gets me reading a book, and I don't mind the fact that I might know a bit about a book before I start reading it. And then number 19 is, what author, genre, series or culture can you just not get into, and why? I don't really have an answer for this one. At the moment, I see myself as being fairly open to anything, even though I already probably have my tastes. I prefer my classics and stuff like that. But I'm not in a position where I've really said no to anything yet. So I don't really have an answer to that. So then it's just the last one, number 20. Do you think everyone should read, and why? And oh wait, and then the last one, number 20. Do you think everyone should read, and why? And I was thinking a bit about this, and I can remember a while ago watching a video by Bet the Food Book Reviews, and he'd sort of looked up the proportion of the world that were literate, the proportion that were illiterate, and I can't really remember what that was at the time of that video, but it was quite staggering and quite shocking, and just realizing that actually being able to read, to be literate, is quite a privilege, and it's something to make the most of. And obviously, for person to person, the way you act on that with what you read, that's totally up to you. That's the great thing with reading. There's such variety, but it's really something I think that more people should make the most of, because so many people just can't read or don't have the opportunity, the means, or the time to. So I think if you can, definitely do it. Alrighty, so there we go. That's the end of the philosophy of reading tag. I hope you found at least some of it interesting. And I'm not going to tag anyone in particular, but if you'd like to do this, if you haven't done it yet, please feel free to do so. Consider yourself tagged. And if you've been mulling this over and that you have certain answers to some of these prompts, feel free to share them down in the comments. But there we have it. That's the end. So I'm going to go now. Have a good day and see you soon. Bye.